worries, no worries. Because we're live, so there's nothing we can do about it. It's
Yeah, I
great.
mean, I'm sorry. Like, this is
I,
working from home, so
I want to know. I want to know how many times on the eLearn hot seat, the eLearn podcast, that we are going to start out with saying, "I'm very sorry, but construction just started next door to me, and there's nothing I can do about it." We're live without a wire here. Um,
yeah,
my
I
name
will
is
preemptively apologize. So, you know,
my name is Stephen Laddick. Many people have either heard my voice or seen my face out there in the e-learning universe. I work for this company here called OpenLMS. And you're listening right now to either the eLearn hot seat, if you're watching it live, or this is a recording of it we published on our podcast streams of the eLearn podcast. And I'm super excited to have Debshila. I want to say your full name because it's just so awesome. Debshila Basu Mallick, who is, oh dear, and I just moved my screen. You're the director of research for OpenStax. I wanted to say it, but then I wanted to make sure I had it right. Welcome to the conversation, Debshila.
thank you so much, Stephen, for having me. And I just realized that, I'm so used to my Zoom that this screen is not flipped, it's not mirrored. So it's
Okay.
like a little bit of a messing with my brain a little bit.
That's all right. This whole conversation is going to mess with our brain. I want to remind everyone that this is live right now on April 7th, 2022. So if you love data, if you love research, if you love open source resources, if you love education, this is a great conversation for you. And I do encourage you to join us. You can put a comment in the chat, even if, no matter where you are, if it's LinkedIn, if it's Facebook, if it's YouTube, they all come to us in this little platform that we have so we can see them. So please. But as I like to start, Debshila, tell me about, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are, etc.
Thanks, Stephen. So my background is in experimental psychology and cognitive neuroscience. I got my PhD from Rice, and I joined OpenStax way back in 2015 as a wee intern, and then I've stayed on ever since, under various roles and in various capacities. Right now, I am the director of research at OpenStax, and I work with a brilliant team of researchers, developers, engineers, and UX designers to really elevate and escalate some of the key research issues that we are facing in education and learning sciences. So that's mine.
Can you just go back and tell me what your PhD is in again?
So my PhD, if I'm happy to discuss with you in depth, but it was mostly along the lines of audiovisual perception. So how do people combine spoken speech and mouth movements to understand speech? Because what I was working on is that, people vary in their ability to combine these two different cues to make a coherent perception. And this is extremely important if you're talking to someone on the phone or you are talking to someone in a crowded marketplace when there are like lots of signals ongoing and you're like trying to hone in on what the other person is saying. And when you add in the visual cues of the mouth movement, that actually increases the accuracy of your perception. So it adds into the spoken sound and makes a stronger perception of what the other person is saying. So there is this cool illusion called the McGurk effect. I encourage everyone to go and check it out on YouTube afterwards, where you have spoken syllables that are different spoken syllables that are spliced together. So you have an auditory ba combined with a visual ga. And oftentimes people will combine the two to perceive a completely new syllable, da, which is like different from the ba and ga. And that's because your brain is trying to make sense of these two disparate cues, and this da syllable is in the middle, in a sense, of these two. And so, in the past, there have been questions around like, is this phenomena only impacted in individuals that are suffering from several different clinical diagnoses. And what we found, and what I found in my work, is that there is significant individual differences. And you will find individuals who always get this DA perception, whereas others never get it. And that's in healthy, normal adults. So sort of went back and reflected on the literature significantly, because it was often being used to say that, okay, this is an indicator of individuals experiencing, like, suffering from autism spectrum conditions. And so, in addition to that, I also worked with neuroimaging and training perception in individuals. But, that seems like a generation ago. And since then, I've transitioned into learning science and education research, and I had a lot of transferable skills that I brought onto this work from my graduate work. So
I dare say that OpenStax is very happy to have you. I think we can already tell that. That's pretty sweet. And I'm a little scared. I think you're gonna call me out to task here. But tell me, like, so when first of all, let's remind everyone. I mean, we've had a couple of people from OpenStax on the show over the last year or so. A lot of cool talks about accessibility, diversity, kind of what you're doing in those realms, like how you Chris, who's my colleague we were talking about earlier, he's one of his favorite things is the equity pause. One of your colleagues talked about. So a lot of great stuff coming out of OpenStax just as an organization, but remind us what's the OpenStax project? Where did it start? I mean, you're sitting at Rice, where it comes from. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So OpenStax, historically has been known as a publisher, like one of the largest publishers of open textbooks in the world. And right now we have a library of over 45 textbooks, and we are expanding that library, currently. And in addition to that, we have EdTech and institutional partnerships. And we also have a partnership with different technology providers who incorporate content within their online homework systems or learning tools or classroom engagement tools. But really moving back to when OpenStax and, which was CNX before, it was conceived by our founder and director, Richard Baraniak, and he's a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Rice. And so, as we talk about research today, he set a very solid foundation for research at OpenStax right from day one. So that has immensely impacted our focus of research, the collaborations that we have right now, the projects that we are thinking about, the problems we are trying to solve, and so on and so forth. So just really happy to dive in.
Yeah, for sure. I hope this isn't too off topic, but it just dawned on me that so OpenStax produces these resources that you can use for free, right? Like these are things that it's an open education resource. That's what it means. Why would you choose otherwise for some of these topics? Let's just say it's physics or math or history or literature. If one of the 45 textbooks that you have, is it because a particular professor or who's teaching a class is they have a really particular resource that they want their students to use, or like what are you competing against as an open resource in terms of providing this education resource to whoever needs it?
That's a really good question. So, historically, this OpenStax idea and this model is relatively new, so as to speak, because the publishing industry has dominated this market for a really long time. And, to the extent that there was this major problem where textbook costs had gone exponentially high over the past several decades. And when we started out with the work that we are doing at OpenStax, we would talk to students, and they would come and share their stories that they had to think about whether they were going to pay rent, buy groceries, or buy their textbooks.
I
Right.
remember, I went to school a long time ago, and even I was like another $1,000 for books for this. Like, what? Where did that come? What? Yeah, sure.
In personally, that's very close to my heart as well, because I came in for my PhD from India, and
Hmm.
then I was on a stipend here, and then I was in the neuroscience program, like psychology and neuroscience program at Rice, and our textbooks were really expensive.
Oh, I'm sure.
And so we were either sharing textbooks amongst a group of students together, and sometimes, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I was photocopying parts
Sure.
of
We all did.
textbooks.
We all,
Yeah, so
100%, 100%. You'd go to the library, you copy out the chapter. That's what you use for notes. Yeah.
right. And so, like, when I came to OpenStax, it was just an amazing idea that we could do this for people,
Hmm.
that this was even an option. So there is like this existing mental model that, commercial publishers have higher quality products that are made available, but we are trying to change that perception now.
Mm.
And really, research will be a key part of this, because you really have to change minds for instructors and students. And like, we already have buy-in from both of these groups, but just to sort of spread the message that these open textbooks are no way inferior to commercial publishers.
That's interesting
And
that would be that for me, it doesn't track. I mean, like, that wouldn't be the first argument that I would think of, but it makes complete sense now that you have put it on the table, right? Because at the same time, all of those people would, if they needed to figure out how to fix a chair, or if they needed how to, do something, that they would go to YouTube, a free resource. They would go to, Twitter. They would go to, some other free resource to, many different how-tos, this and that. But when it comes to like the academic
right.
universe, like suddenly a different bar is set. And like, but even then you think about this, like you think about Khan Academy, right? Like, completely free resource still today. And it's a foundation, right? It's 501c3 nonprofit. And people like, this is like the holy grail now. Like, for my kids, like they're required to use some of the Khan Academy stuff, but it's free. So it's very
Right.
interesting that you would be fighting that perception as a key a key challenge.
Yeah, I mean, when Khan Academy was new, there was some skepticism to its use and to how valid and the quality of the materials that were coming out. Now there is growing acceptance towards these materials, because they have become so much more mainstream than before. And the
Mm-hmm.
same applies to the textbooks here. So we kind of want to, as an organization, work with instructors, work with students, to sort of, one, make sure that we, like, all the content is meeting their standards and their needs, and as well as make sure that we have a rich library of resources to sort of meet the different challenges that students and instructors experience. Like, they might want, in addition to the textbook, they might want like slides to go with it, or they want some like interactives to go with it. So we are trying really hard as an organization to make sure that the content is engaging for our students, that we are offering support and services to our instructors, so that they have all the things that they need to have their trust in using our products. So
Fantastic. So I want to remind everybody, I'm here with Debshila Basu Mallick, who is the director of research at OpenStax. And really, like, I want to move our conversation to a place where, your area of expertise, like, why is research important to OpenStax? I mean, it sounds to many people, or I'm guessing that many people listening, it's like, hey, look, here's a textbook. You need to verify that the material is accurate. And as you said, but beyond that, what are you researching? Like, what are the key things that you've either found during your tenure, or maybe some projects or streams that you picked up as you took on the mantle of director of research, that OpenStax has found important, or maybe has discovered along the way? I'd love to hear some of the ahas.
yeah, so like I was saying, thanks to our founder, like Rich, we already had very solid trust and belief in the power of research.
Mm.
So when we started out, we wanted to make sure that we could transform learning in a way that it would work for every learner. So as researchers on the team, our moonshot is really to identify and meet the needs of individual learners, with what works best for them at the time and given the context. And our goal is really to improve short and long-term outcomes for the learners that we serve. So, this this is an interesting approach, like when I think about it in my daily work, because traditionally when we look at the learning and education literature, a lot of studies have been conducted where students from like intro psych courses have been directed to like controlled laboratory conditions with very controlled learning materials to really identify and understand the underlying processes that serve learning. And what we are trying to do is move away from that model slightly, like build on it, extend it, and try to get a comprehensive picture of what and how and our students are learning. But primarily, like when we think of our work, we think of three guiding questions. So we want to understand who is the learner, because all learners are unique and they have rich histories and different individual characteristics and experiences. So we want to be able to account for that, because something that works for you may not work for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one question. The second question is to really hone in on what they are learning at the time, because it matters whether they're studying the sciences or like physics, for example, versus sociology or history. So we want to make sure that we are looking not just at the learners, but also what they're learning at the time. And the third and really important question is, how are they learning?
Hmm.
Because the learning context matters, the processes matter. So whether they are learning online versus in person, which has become a very relevant problem and question right now, what kind of instructional design strategies are working for these students? And we want to make sure that we are capturing the answers to all of these questions together in unison to understand, like, have a clear, comprehensive picture of the entire learning process so that we can support like every learner in their individual contexts.
Hmm.
So, if these questions would have been easier if they were being studied separately. But the moment you try to think of these questions together in synchrony, it results in a combinatorial problem.
I was just gonna say,
So
like, how do you even design the research question that you want? Like, are you able to put on the table like a very specific research question that you have right now, either about a text or about could you give us an example?
yes, so a part of this is ensuring that we are measuring all the individual differences that are involved. We are identifying the context that the student is immersed in, and then we can hone in on specific interventions with these information after taking these information into account. So I will tell you a little more, because being able to measure these three questions and effectively design interventions is what we are trying to do on our brand new research infrastructure that we are calling Kinetic by OpenStax. So say, for example, like we have a highlighting research question that we are trying to develop an intervention where we make highlighting more engaging for students, because the literature has mixed findings as to how impactful highlighting is in learning. So say, for example, we vary the level of engagement with different highlighting strategies. So someone is just highlighting without any guidance, and then someone is highlighting and note taking, right? So there is more engagement when you're doing both together. And simultaneously, we have a sense of who these learners are from measures of individual differences that we have collected before, or we collect as a part of the study. And then we have it under control, our control, because, and again, this is because OpenStax is in such a unique position because it's at the intersection of like ed tech and content and research and community partnerships. Like all of this really puts research in a very privileged position because we have content in our textbooks that we can build off of. So this intervention can be deployed using psychology content or biology content, and we can look at these content-based differences, like maybe the strategy works well for one kind of content versus others. So it really allows us to dive into like different levels of granularity with our findings. But all of this is only possible with a very agile research infrastructure to support it. So
those two words usually don't go together, agile and research. That's a very, I mean, you can go way back, action research, right? That's like agility at its best, right? You're in the, you're doing it, you know, but that's really nice. That's it's exciting to hear that you've found yourself in a place where you can move, you know what I mean? It's like, hey, we're going to research, but we're going to have to change as we go along, and the research is going to evolve and morph and as we make discoveries, right?
Right. You know, with the work that we are doing now, and you know, I have some shameless plugs for Kinetic in place.
100%. No, we gotta get. I know we're gonna get there for sure. 100%. That's we want to talk about Kinetic for sure. But I want to ask you about, like, first, like is there, like, I'd love to hear, you know, is there a way that you've changed a text, or is there, you know, do you produce a specific like output from this research where it's like, hey, look, when you're doing biology, or you know, learner X, you know, we noticed that you downloaded our biology books. Here's our, you know, what we've recognized as really great learning strategies from other people. Like, is that what comes out of this, or what are the outcomes that comes from your research? Like, what happens?
Yeah. So what we are trying to transition to is like multi-pronged impacts for our outcomes. So not only are we publishing our findings to advance the state of science, like very important, right? The second is making sure that we are not tying our findings down in jargon and technical language, you know, in articles only. We want to make sure that we are communicating with a broad audience using, you know, medium like yours, like podcasts. You know, this is something still in the works right now because, you know, COVID significantly delayed some of the work that we were trying to do, but that's kind of the vision that I have for our findings, like having communication with a broader community of audiences using blog posts and podcasts, and, you know, just putting these findings out to the people that are contributing to the science. And then the third piece is using these findings to really create this virtuous cycle where we are building them into our products that goes back out to the community, that reaches the community at a larger scale. So that's kind of what I envision with the findings. And we have definitely published our findings before. We continue to do that now. And then making sure that this reaches the community that we are trying to serve. Because one thing that came out of COVID was that, you know, when people were rushed into making this transition to online learning, they were trying to figure out best practices, and there wasn't a central place for them to find all of those resources in one place. So like, the community got together and pulled their resources together to make those opportunities for them. And we want to continue to support that need as online learning becomes more mainstream.
Fantastic. All right. What have been, I mean, you just said COVID's one of your challenges. The intersection of the three research, overarching research questions is one of your challenges. What else, makes this a worthwhile pursuit for you? Like what else, keeps you up at night in terms of how are we going to do this or how are we going to do that? Is it too many requests? Is there just too many leads to follow? Too many research questions to answer? Is it, I mean, there's always a funding issue, right? We all want $1 billion to go do that stuff, but like, what are the challenges that you face as the director of research, most specifically that, some of our audience might be interested in or maybe could help you with?
Yeah, so things that kept me up are slightly different from 1.5, 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I'll rewind back to that time, because at that point of time, we were trying to figure out how can we do research in a way where, as researchers, we get all the information that we need to meet the needs of the community. Because, you talked to Kathy Fletcher, one of my colleagues, before, and we have, over the past few years, really been deeply thinking about equity issues in education. And as a researcher, one of the key things I was thinking about is, how do we capture information about student background and individual characteristics in a way that would allow us to dive into these equity questions? Because prior to that, we weren't capturing that information. So, and when you think about it, like at a high level, when you look at more population-based approaches, right? Like we are looking at like a control condition and a treatment condition, and maybe you just have an A/B test between the two. So, you have highlighting versus highlighting and notes, right? That you're contrasting together. So that, and when you break it down and you say you want to look at demographic differences in these two strategy use, the moment you start disaggregating, the funnel becomes shorter and shorter. So when you look at intersectionality, like say you have individuals who are like first generation students and who are English language learning students and who are, from either African American or Hispanic backgrounds, like when you start narrowing down the funnel, your sample size decreases if you are not running a large scale study.
Right.
And then you don't have enough power to make meaningful inferences from that. So what kept me up back then was that we needed the ability to reach like large pools of learners so that we could effectively answer these questions. And that was another key piece that motivated this Kinetic platform.
So, I mean, you've taken us there beautifully. So tell us what Kinetic is, and OpenStax. I'm embarrassed to say I'm not sure exactly when this launched. I'm not sure. Is it super recent or has this been around for a year? Or
it's super recent.
Okay,
So
I'm glad I didn't miss it and didn't know. Good.
Yeah. So the Institute of Educational Sciences had this initiative come out last year in February or March, that they were trying to connect different learning platforms that served over 100,000 students, who could like connect together and work as a collaborative network of digital learning platforms. So we applied for that grant, and with the idea of Kinetic. And right now we are a part of this 5-team network that's being spearheaded by Digital Promise as an organization. And each of these networks have their special niches. So for Kinetic, we are serving post-secondary learners, so higher ed learners, and it's really a lightweight research infrastructure that connects with the OpenStax suite of products.
Okay.
And when we had Kinetic, we were already reaching 6 million students who were coming to read our textbooks online. And so that was an opportunity for us to really hone in on questions around online learning, like what's effective, what's working for who, answering all the 3 orienting questions that I mentioned before. Who is the learner? What are they learning? And how are they learning? So the thing about Kinetic is that it decoupled research from directly being injected into our product, because there's always that trade-off that research might impact the experiences in a way that may not be ideal for the end user.
Mm-hmm.
So to that end, we decoupled it, and now it stands as an external platform where students who come in to read our textbooks, they see a call to action and they can opt in to participate in research on Kinetic.
Cool.
And the other thing about this platform is that everything in all the steps are very explicit and transparently laid out to the learners, because we want to be very upfront about the research that we are doing and give learners the power of their choice and agency. The goal being that eventually we have findings and tools that are completely validated by research on the platform that students benefit from using as they learn. So it's that whole virtuous cycle that I was talking about. Like, you do the formative research and you validate an intervention, then you have it out in the product so that the product is not spending time on their own trying to get that research done. And as researchers, it's a great opportunity for us, because it gives us not only the power to sort of explore, like conduct exploratory research, but also dive into replicating existing findings, things that we have validated in a laboratory setting or with using paper and pencil. We want to see how that might work in an online setting. And Kinetic is able to accommodate these varying methodologies on the platform. So we are kind of approaching different sides of learning research.
Sounds, I mean, the super exciting stuff. I mean, you've opened yourself up to a ginormous research opportunity. You Do you think that, or is there any danger in biasing the learner by? I mean, I understand the need for acceptance into a research trial of any kind, and sort of awareness and consent. But how does it, have you seen, would that skew the results? If I'm a learner, I'm like, okay, I know that I'm doing this, and so maybe that's going to change how I will operate. Or I'm just thinking of like, the online marketing community. I mean, they've got things they're running in the background. They're watching you, where do you look? Where do you click? All these things, and they're not telling you, but that's also how they figure out how you actually really use a website. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so that's a really real concern, if that makes sense.
Sure.
We
Yeah.
talk about selection bias all the time, right? So one of the ways that we are trying to mitigate that is by also working with instructors to recruit and not just relying on self assigned recruitment. So hopefully, we are trying a few different things. One is making sure that we have multiple avenues for recruitment, working with instructors who provide some form of incentive for participating in this research as a part of their course grade. And then as well as, having self-selection and offering small prize giveaways on the platform to sort of make sure that students are coming and working on it. The other key thing, which I think is going to be very important for us down the line, is that we are prioritizing research that gives some form of feedback at the end so that students walk away with something that they can use. So at the end of, at the conclusion of a study, the goal is that the findings that we have, in addition to publishing in a peer-reviewed journal, we also want to make sure that those findings are communicated on the Kinetic dashboard itself, and it reaches back to these students who have taken their time to participate in this study, so that they also know how their data was being used and what people and the community have learned from it. So yeah.
All right. Is there, I guess, since it's such a new service, are there already research findings that are coming out of it, or is it too new that we don't have insights quite yet?
Yeah, so it's still very new, and we don't have enough. So what we are trying to do, right, is to make sure that we are at a scale large enough where we could dive in deep into the data. And right now, since we are still new, we are waiting to accrue data to reach that capacity where we can terminate a study. So it's going to be a while before we can get to that point, but I'm hopeful, and hopefully, as learners watch your podcast, it's weird I said just watch a podcast, but so as learners,
listen or watch or whatever.
listen or watch or whatever their preferred modality is, I'm hoping that also helps spread the word out to them, so that if they're interested, they come by and check out what we have to offer.
Well, thank you very much. The last question that I always ask everybody on the podcast here is a simple one, but it's really, what are you excited about the most for the next, in the near term, right? Let's say 6 months, 12 months, maximum 18 months. Obviously, you're excited about the research building up. Obviously, you're excited about more learners coming in, and Kinetic is a cool thing, but are there other either shiny new objects or processes or research topics or things that you'd like to give a shout out to, or that you're really looking forward to?
Yes, so many. So I'm
No,
going to,
great.
so you
Awesome.
have to tell me how much time I have, because I'm
You have
going
as
to
much
start
time as you
ranting.
want.
Okay.
Tell me.
So a key thing about Kinetic is that we are introducing a different approach to working with large-scale research data. And this is being used in other industries, but not so much in learning research, education research, which we're calling secure data enclaves to connect and analyze data. Now, the key thing about these secure data enclaves is that, one, it minimizes security risks, and two, it enables researchers to be able to analyze fully identified data without compromising the security aspect. So essentially, the way it works is, imagine you have this little computer with all your software, your tools, your analysis scripts that are put into, uploaded with, and then this little computer connects with a database that has all the research data in it. So all your scripts will work on this fully identified database and only retrieve the aggregated results back to you.
Super
So
cool.
that way, it's, you are not losing out those individual level differences, which might, bring to question if I had that locally stored on my system, there could be data breaches, and there would be risk of exposing or re-identification of the students from these data sets. So we are trying to minimize that. And the second thing is, it's a logistical benefit, which is we all have humble laptops and devices at our disposal, right?
Sure.
when we work with very large scale data, as edtech companies typically tend to have, like if you try to bring in all the data onto our system, it would just crash our system. So having this mechanism to be able to work on that full data set without impacting your system adversely, I think is also a big win for us. And this is important, especially with all the advances in data science and AI that are concurrently happening right now, that can really help us move this state of the science forward significantly. Like, so much of learning research now is so interdisciplinary. Like in my team, we have individuals who are more education research focused, and we collaborate with Rich's graduate students who are machine learning and AI in education focused grad students. So we all work together to address these big questions using different techniques and converging on the evidence. So this is going to be a really big boost for the work that we do. And not just for us, the other part of Kinetic is that we want to build a community of researchers who come and work on the platform. So, you know, I cannot wait to see the collaborations that happen, the work that comes out of it, because we expect like researchers with different specialties coming together to work with our systems. So really excited.
I mean, this is, yeah, that you've really built an ecosystem that has enormous potential, and I'm really looking forward to, you know, circling back with you in a year, in a while, you know, and after you've got more data and more collaboration and whatnot. We want to hear more about it. But for right now, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to talk with me and talk to me about Kinetics and about the research that you're doing at OpenStax. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really pleasure. Bye.